Hey everybody, it's episode 5 of series 3 of UIO, the podcast for teen girls. Hugs to everyone, and thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teen girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today we're talking about internet safety, a topic with so many unanswered questions. It is, after all, still a relatively new space. How safe are we on the internet? What threats are we facing? How can we manage these threats online? Ultimately, how can we stay safe online, particularly you, our teen girls, which is what this episode is all about. We are so fortunate today to have an expert with inside information who can shed some light on the situation. A pioneer in internet safety, Charlotte Ansley has been instrumental in working alongside the government, local authorities, and schools for the past 20 years to help children live safer online. She now runs her own e-safety and consultancy company, and Charlotte continues to work with schools, charities, and local authorities throughout the UK. Welcome, Charlotte, and thanks so much for being our guest on UIO.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's really, really exciting, to have the opportunity to talk about this. Though the internet has changed our lives in so many positive ways, there's so many threats and concerns that challenge day-to-day experiences. And I want to talk particularly about some of the biggest issues facing teenage girls. I've read so much about online grooming, cyberbullying, inappropriate and harmful content, and also sharing inappropriate images. And for the sake of our conversation, I'd like to take the issues in two categories, if you will. One where external factors are dominant and the other internal factors are more prevalent, such as sharing inappropriate images and content. Let's look at the latter first. Back in the spring, we launched a campaign called Wait a While, with a survey that touched upon some of the issues that teenage girls are facing, which are specific to the internet. And one of them was sexting, sharing the images. We surveyed 1,266 girls, 14-year-old girls, and 16% said they had shared pictures of themselves. And our research, as well as that of others, turned up that most teens don't really understand that this is criminal. And I'd like you to talk to us about what can be done to educate teens about the criminality and also the mental damage that this sort of thing causes.
Sadly, it can cause quite extreme psychological and emotional damage to young people, especially if their image has been shared widely, especially if they don't know where that image has ended up. So it's really less about the criminality and more about the kind of mental health and mental well-being of especially young girls, because sadly, from my experience, most of the time where this has happened, it has been the girl that has been the victim, and there's still quite a gender imbalance around some of these issues, notwithstanding that this absolutely does happen to boys as well, and boys have also been put in very vulnerable positions. But the psychological and emotional well-being for young people, and especially young girls in this context, is really, really crucial. It is illegal to share a sexually explicit image, even if you are in a relationship with somebody, and even if you're 16 and you can legally have sex. If you are under 18, and you share this kind of imagery, you are breaking the law. Lots of young people are very frustrated by that, especially 17-year-olds who may have been in a relationship with somebody for a number of years. There have been young people who have been criminalised and subjected to the criminal justice system for sharing these kind of images. The police are taking a more pragmatic view around some of these issues. So something was introduced back in 2016 called Outcome 21. So if somebody is involved in this kind of exchanging of imagery or this dissemination of imagery or the generation of this kind of imagery, then they might not feel the full force of the law if it was a consenting relationship. However, if it was coercive in any way, so if somebody was forced to either take a picture or coerced into sharing the imagery, then in that kind of scenario, then young people would feel the full force of the law. And, this is really because the law is lagging behind the kind of digital world in many aspects of life, but certainly in this aspect of life.
Wow. This is really heavy stuff. And I do think a big part of it is educational. And I agree with you 100% that the mental and emotional ramifications for this are just amazingly important for people to get their head around. Yeah. But I also think that it's so important to educate our young people about the illegal aspect of it as well, because it can also have implications for them, not only in the now, but for their future. So what can teenage girls do to ensure that they are using appropriate content, content that will not come back to haunt them in the future?
I think your point about education, it's crucial. We don't want young people to end up in a situation where they're not able to get jobs, or they're not able to be a teacher or a policewoman if they've engaged in this kind of behaviour. And that's partly why the police are taking a much more pragmatic view around the sharing of this kind of imagery. It's important to give young girls the facts about this kind of behaviour. Let's get real about this stuff. The crucial age, and what we know is that most young people start to share this imagery around the age of 14. So we need to make sure that education piece starts way before then, so that we start to talk to them about what's appropriate to share, what's not appropriate to share, about how that might impact you in the future, and that we give them real life scenarios. So many teenagers feel patronized by some of the educational programs that exist. We need to get real, and we need to give them the facts, and we need to talk to them in a language that they understand. I think it's really important to be positive online, to project yourself in a way that you feel good about, and to actually be mindful of the content that you're looking at, and to think about whether it's appropriate to share something, or whether it's appropriate to even look at something. Do you feel comfortable with that if somebody was saying that about you or sharing that about you? So it goes back to that old adage of, don't do unto people that you wouldn't like someone to do to you. And it all has consequences. It might be online, but it hurts people. It affects people, and it has permanency around it, which is different to the offline context in the physical world.
Yeah, it's a very, very different world. And I really, really take your point about starting to educate young people earlier. That's a really toughie, which is another podcast, another story. But I do think it's really key. Talk to us a bit about cyberbullying. What really is it, and what can our girls do to ensure they don't get caught up into cyberbullying?
I mean, it's important that we don't confuse bullying with other things, because sometimes the word bullying, in inverted commas, can be overused. And certainly I've seen scenarios where somebody says one thing to somebody that's quite kind of jokey, but, and then they get accused of bullying someone. So I think we need to be careful how we use that term. Bullying generally means something that happens over a period of time. It can take many different forms online. So it can be exclusion. So it can be exclusion from groups. So if there's a WhatsApp group where people are communicating with one another and you're excluded from that group, it can feel pretty awful. It can be somebody texting and texting horrible things to you. It can be anonymous messages, which is really damaging for young people. And it can really take several shapes and forms. And interestingly, again, be mindful of your words. I don't know if any of your listeners watch the the Jessie Nelson documentary about the bullying that she suffered from after she won the X Factor.
Okay.
But it was really vile comments made directly to her that she said, what should have been the best moment of her life when she won the X Factor. There's just awful bullying that had a real emotional impact on her over a long period of time.
That's really important to make the clarifications, because so often we can confuse things, and so we really appreciate that. Are there things that girls can do further? I mean, if they get that sort of thing, do you block people? What do you do?
I think absolutely block people. It takes quite a lot of maturity to decide to block somebody. I think sometimes that's quite a tall order. I absolutely think you should do it. But I think blocking somebody is really empowering, but it's not always easy to do because you kind of want to know what they're saying, but you don't want to know what they're saying.
Yes.
Take screenshots of what's being said about you, report the bullying, talk to your parent or to your friends or to your teacher, talk to somebody that you trust about how this is impacting on you. Don't kind of put it to one side and think, do you know what, I'll be fine with this. I can get through it. I'll be resilient towards it. Talk about it. Make sure you've got the evidence, because the good news is about the online world in terms of bullying is that there is this evidence trail. So hopefully you will be able to find out who is saying these things to you consistently, and you can hold them to account. And the social media companies are getting better at kind of taking down content that constitutes bullying. There are several organisations who will help to mediate that process as well. So if you're not getting the right kind of response to something that's happened to you, then, there are places like Childline that you can go to who will help to kind of mediate so that you can get that content removed. And I think as an individual, you should always challenge yourself and not be one of those people who is a bystander and watching while bullying is unfolding before your eyes. Challenge behavior. Ask that person, do you really think it's appropriate to behave and say those things about that other person? Even if that's quite difficult, I think that we should all start to challenge those people who are, making bullying their business. Absolutely.
That's really key. Lots of good information in there. It's a great segue to talk about duty of care. And I want to talk about that. But I want to ask you another question before we get to that. So we'll sort of pin that and come right back to it because it's so important. I do want to know, what would you say is the biggest issue facing teenage girls at the moment concerning internet safety?
I think it's about imagery. And I think it's about the constant bombardment of imagery, particularly for young girls, about how they should look, what they should wear, how they should pose, how they should stand, all of these things. And I think it's really important that everybody's more honest. Most of the people that you see on Instagram have had hair, they've had their hair done, they've had their makeup done. They might take, 50 selfies before they find the perfect one. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody needs to be more honest about how long it takes to look like that. Because I think for young girls, there is this pressure for them to look a certain way. And it can really, again, affect your mental health, affect your emotional well-being, especially when you're a teenager and your body's changing and you're growing and your hormones are racing. It can really affect how you feel about yourselves. And we all have a duty as parents, as educators, as people who are involved in this arena to make sure that we protect our children from that and that we talk to them about what a real body looks like, and we shouldn't have all these high expectations for ourselves.
That's so key, to really talk to our children about what's real. But from a duty of care standpoint, what progress do you think is being made in this area, particularly with the gatekeepers, the internet company.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from them and parents and guardians who you've mentioned, who is responsible for keeping our children safe on the internet?
I think it's a joint responsibility. The problem is that a lot of the providers for the last probably 15, 20 years now have been metaphorically lobbing the ball over the fence in the court of parents. It's your children, you need to take control, which I think absolutely parents should. I think they should talk to their children. Most parents want to support their children in every aspect of their life. But recently, we have taken a much stronger stand around the responsibility of particularly social media providers and platforms, where our kids are all hanging out on a daily basis. So the UK government have produced a white paper about online harms. One of the first things that they want to do is they want to regulate some of these social media companies. They want there to be transparency around the way that they manage their reporting, the way that they triage complaints from some of their consumers, so that we can all see and understand what the parameters are, because lots of children are operating in these environments, significant amounts of children. I mean, it goes from, at the ages of 10 to 12, it goes about 24% of children having a social media profile to 45%. We know that it doubles in that time period because it's when everybody goes off to secondary school and suddenly they want to get more involved in social media. So it's a joint responsibility. Government have a responsibility. Social media providers have a responsibility. Parents have a responsibility to help to protect their children and young people themselves. If we could make the online environment incredibly positive, it would be a very different experience, not just for children, but for older people as well.
Yeah, this is so important. I just don't think that we can stress enough how the responsibility lies everywhere with all of us. I had an experience this summer. I was in Cornwall in a lovely park and overheard a young boy say something about the nature of the internet. And he wanted to share something with his sister, or she could have been a cousin or a friend, called the Momo challenge. And the little girl that the little boy wanted to tell about Momo threatened to tell an adult. And he really thought she was being ridiculous. He said they wouldn't say anything on the internet that wasn't good or safe. Why would they put it on the internet? But I looked it up, and it is really horrible. It's quite scary. And so I think there are 2 points for me: that somebody that young knows about something that can have such an impact on your mental and emotional unrest. But going back to your point about the importance of education early on, that the young boy thought it was okay because it was on the internet.
Yeah. And we have generations of children and young people growing up thinking that everything they read online is true. Now, fortunately, UK schools are trying to redress the balance around what's true, what's not true online. And we've got some really good guidance from the Department for Education and some really great educational programs that start to explore what's real, what's not real, what fake news is. I mean, Momo is a really good example of that, because it was a hoax, but lots and lots of young children, especially young children, believed that this was going to happen, and it kind of turned into this kind of urban myth.
Yeah.
It went round like wildfire in schools, have you seen the Momo? And actually nobody had seen it, but everybody was talking about it.
It's a sort of a good segue to the mental and emotional health and how that's related to, staying safe online. Can you talk to us a little bit about mental emotional unrest, something like going back to a hoax like the Momo challenge?
The Momo was really, like I say, quite impactful for young children, because some young children were having nightmares about whether or not they were going to actually see this this image. I don't know if you've seen the image, but it was.
I saw it. And can you explain what it is? Because I failed to explain what it is.
Well, it's kind of like, a bit like the Scream poster, where the eyes are sort of dragged down a bit. And the image was really not very nice. So for young children, it would have been quite scary to think that you might be watching something on YouTube quite innocently, like, I don't know, Peppa Pig or whatever it was.
Yes.
And then suddenly you would see this horrible sort of ghostly woman with horrible dark greasy hair and eyes dragged downwards. It would have been scary to think that you might have seen that. So that can have a really emotional impact on especially little children. And if you are having a positive experience online, which for the most part, most children are telling us that they have, they're telling us that for the most part, they love being online. They enjoy it. It's fun. They get to talk to people. They get to share stories. They get to look at lovely images of things. So for the most part, they do feel really safe, which for us as adults, it's then quite difficult to convince someone of a hypothetical risk. It's really difficult to say, okay, well, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. And then your kid turns around to you and says, yeah, but I haven't seen any of that, Mum. So why would I do that? That's really challenging.
Yeah, no, it is. And maybe it's a matter of just saying there's some wonderful things, but every now and then if something wonderful doesn't pop up, don't be afraid to tell me about it. Then that way you can sort of help them with the mental and emotional unrest that comes on. Because you said for the most part, if they are having wonderful experiences, because it is a wonderful thing, the internet is. And this is what this is all about, how to keep it wonderful, how to keep it safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that leads me to ask you, and there might not be a right time, but do you feel that there's a certain age? I know people develop at different stages in life, but when it's right for a teenage girl, for example, to have a social media account, because girls are so disproportionately impacted by some of this stuff, as we talked about body image, for example, earlier on.
It's really difficult. Officially, the age is 13. So if you are under 13, officially you shouldn't have a social media account. Again, what we do know is that many teenagers do. And as I mentioned earlier, the tipping point is that kind of 10 to 12 age group, yes, when it almost doubles in the amount of social media accounts. Talk to your parents about whether it's appropriate for you to have social media, how you're going to manage that. Keep those communication lines open. But really, a lot of this will depend on individuals about whether they think it's, they're ready to have this kind of access to social media. And a lot of it will depend on parents as well. But I would be open with your parents. Talk to them about why you want it and why you want to use it, because it's important that they know that you have a profile. What you wouldn't want is as a parent, is for your child to have a profile and you not necessarily know about it.
That's absolutely correct. And one of the things that I'd love to talk to you about is Snapchat. I do not understand Snapchat. So talk to us about how it works and whether it's one of those difficult things to govern and whether it's even still a player.
Oh, absolutely a player. Yeah, teenagers love it. They love the kind of nature of it. I would say that it's probably, top three. And as you say, it's built on a principle that people can share videos or pictures and it disappears within a few seconds. It's changed quite a lot over the last few years in terms of its functionality. It's become a lot more popular. So you've gone from being able to just sharing snaps with a person to now sharing stories or broadcasting with multiple people. And one of the things that young people love, teenagers and girls especially love, is the filters that you can put on Snapchat, like the funny noses, yes, and the and all that kind of thing. You can locate people on there as well, so you know where they are. So if you're chatting to your friends, you know where they are, which can sometimes cause problems, because if one of your friends said, "Oh, would you like to go out tonight?" and you said, "No, I'm staying in, I'm not going anywhere," and then your friend can see that you're out at the park or out down the street. So sometimes it's best to have what's called ghost mode on there, so that people don't know where you are. And I would certainly advise young girls to have ghost mode on, especially in that context, so you wouldn't necessarily know where people are. But sometimes people find it useful to know where they are. It is really tricky to police because of the nature of it and the fact that the imagery disappears. Snapchat have been investigated in the US around data breaches and from the Federal Trade Commission. I'll get my teeth in. So they are kind of keeping an eye on Snapchat because they've lost quite a lot of data over the years. So it's I would say to your girls and your young listeners, make sure that what you're sharing on there is appropriate and you feel happy about it, because for the most part, you don't own that imagery. You are effectively giving away your rights to that imagery by signing up to the kind of terms and conditions in the first place. And Snapchat isn't the only one that does that. Most of them do. But be mindful and be aware of what you're sharing. The Children's Commissioner a couple of years ago did a project with a law firm in London looking at what we're signing over when we sign up to terms and conditions of social media sites. And it effectively says we can use your photos, we can use all the content that you generate through using our app for all of us. But it's incredibly hard to police as a parent, really difficult, because you can share something, it's gone within 15 seconds. But the key to this is really about talking. It's always about talking to your kids, always about talking to your parents and kind of being open and transparent about things.
I think that's absolutely brilliant advice. And it's so key to reiterate and point out that, okay, it's very difficult to police and it disappears in 15 seconds, but it's still with that company and it still could come back to haunt you one day. So the same principles and rules that you apply to sharing images and data and on social media in general has to apply to Snapchat as well. Because I think it's so easy to think, nobody's ever going to see it. It's going to disappear in 15 seconds. So I can just put this out, really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We're really getting a lot of wonderful information. And so let's talk about, the values versus the danger of having social media accounts. How do we get our teenagers in particular to balance this out?
I think you've used a key word there. The key word is balance. I think having social media can be really powerful. It can help you to project yourself incredibly positively. So when you are leaving school to go to university or to get a job, you can use your social media as a platform to promote yourself and promote the kinds of things that you're about. And it can help you get a job. It can help you to go on to the next stage of your life. And I think we are living in a world where it's incredibly difficult for teenagers to not have any social media. And certainly through the work that I've done in schools, I haven't met many teenagers and many teenage girls who don't have any social media at all. I've met some, and for some of them, it was a very conscious decision that they decided that it was, too disruptive for them. I think this is about enjoying other things in life as well. So making sure that you do have that contact face to face with other people, and making sure that there are other things that are going on in your life. And because social media can be a huge distraction as well. If you're at home trying to get your homework done, or you're trying to write something, or if you're trying to sort of, switch off, it can be incredibly distracting, and it's quite a hard skill to master. You don't have that compulsion to kind of check all the time and to look to see if someone's liked your Instagram post. So I think we need to help young people and teenagers to self-regulate a little bit.
Yes.
And I always say to my son, if I need to be that person for you until you get to the stage where you can self-regulate yourself, then I am happy to be that person. So I am happy to take your phone off you while you're doing your work if you want me to be that person. And generally, he's quite good. But sometimes we need a little bit of help to not follow through with that compulsion all the time, because even adults have that compulsion to check things, and it's all notifications going off, and checking if somebody's liked your post and then feeling terrible if somebody hasn't liked your post. So it's really important that we get that balance right between offline and online.
That's really key. Thanks so much for that. We're coming to the end of the podcast now, but we'd love to hear about your pioneering work. I've mentioned a lot of what you're doing, but if there's anything more that you want to tell us about your work and where people can find you, and then we'll get some hot tips from you for staying safe on the internet.
Find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. My tag is C Ansley, AYNSLEY, e-safety. So it's C Ansley e-safety. I'm doing lots of work at the moment with young people and trying to kind of gather their views around how to make some of these platforms that they all use safer. So if you have any comments about what you think some of these platforms could do to help to kind of make you safer, then please let me know. And like I say, the best place to find me is on Twitter. I'd be delighted to hear from you about what you think.
A big part of it is people want to be a part of the solution. They want to share their ideas. And so thank you very much for doing that. Are there any other hot tips or things that you want to leave with teenage girls that we possibly haven't covered?
I've kind of got a little rap sheet, if you like. I think be really aware of one another, because what I would love to see, especially in the online context and especially from young girls, is them supporting each other and being positive about each other online. I think if you can create an online environment where people are actually being quite positive and quite nice to each other for the most part, and having kind of intellectual and constructive debate, I think that would make everybody's time online much easier. And you young teenage girls, you're going to be the ones that start to shape the environment as we go through this. The internet wasn't built for children and young people, and yet you guys are all hanging out there. So let's try and make it a nice place for you to be, and talk to your friends, talk to your parents, report things that are unacceptable. Make sure that you do report things to the providers. And if you're not getting responses, shout about it. Shout about the fact that there was some content on there that was really negative about you and nobody did anything about it, because there are organisations out there who can help you to get some of this content removed. So keep talking, keep supporting one another, and definitely report any content that you think is inappropriate.
That's absolutely amazing. It's really wonderful advice for our teenage girl listening audience, and also for boys and for adults as well, because it's so important to take some responsibility for that space that you're operating in. So if you're operating in that online space, I absolutely love all of what you said, but particularly about being positive and being nice and, shaping a nice community in which you operate in.
Yeah, really important.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, for a wonderful, wonderful podcast. And it's just been absolutely amazing to talk with you. And thank you so much for being our guest on UIO.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. That is a wrap for UIO on Internet Safety. Great show with lots of insight from Charlotte Ansley. Be aware of one another, be positive, be nice, and just make the internet a nice, safe place to be. It's all about balance. And you can find Charlotte on Twitter. Hit her up on Twitter. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray about the importance of governance and managing the internet to ensure that our children are safe from harmful activity and content. I pray for more understanding and collaboration from society in general, whether internet businesses, government, schools, parents, and guardians, and internet users. It can be a wonderful resource. I pray for good practices for the well-being of all. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of UIO for some straight talk with an award-winning expert who has battled social anxiety herself, Claire Eastham. Meanwhile, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook, sonjalewis.com/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about, and keep sending those questions on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember, it is UIO.